Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Kari Ilonummi. This is your monthly report for June 2014 at nospinnewssource.com. We have a whole bunch of issues to discuss. We have video footage of live Benghazi trial hearings, congressional hearings, in which top brass of the CIA, along with other folks, were grilled with questions, and it's starting to look a little bit more and more fishy. So, that picture you just saw at the beginning there was a picture of one of my favorite artists and I that I saw over the weekend, which his name is Tech N9ne. I was able to say hello and spend a little bit of time with him. So that's who the picture is. He's a well-known rapper that played and performed here in Seattle Friday and Saturday evening, which I enjoyed as an early birthday gift to myself. So at this point in the show, before we get on, we'll show you something kind of happy and kind of fun and interesting. From what would be Bakersfield, California, which is where I'm originally from, of what would be video footage of a cat saving a little boy from a mean dog next door. So check this out. And welcome back. Now, often I speak of folks in history, forefathers, and people who've had a major impact upon the United States of America. I discuss the Constitution and names such as George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. What would Franklin Roosevelt do if he were here today, or John F. Kennedy? Well, it's one thing for someone to interpret and to speak for these individuals as such. But how about when it comes to you from an actual family member, a descendant of the individual, such as Martin Luther King? If Martin Luther King were here today, would he support Barack Obama's policies just because Barack Obama is an African American? Or would he be against the policies of Barack Obama? Where would Martin Luther King be? Well, let's find out from his niece right now. And we will discover exactly what kind of a man Martin Luther King is, and if this president is anything like Martin Luther King. Read my lips and listen to her speak.
When they counsel these leaders, they want to do it from a position of the Bible, which is higher than any political party. So Martin Luther King Jr., in his own words, was an independent.
Yes.
He wrote that himself. Yeah.
Well, listen, in the time we've got left, tell us about the new book, when it's coming out, and just your take on Obama. I mean, I think of him as the opposite of Martin Luther King. The way MSNBC and Al Sharpton try to invoke racial division because they're busy stealing all of our futures. Obamacare, raising taxes on poor people. What's your take on Obama?
I just think it's amazing that people wanted to say that Obama was the realization of the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. President Obama has actually said that America is no longer a Christian nation. And I know that my uncle would be very upset to hear that. My uncle was a man of God, and he loved the Lord, and he was a preacher of the gospel. Civil rights leader, yes, but definitely a preacher. He was not a politician. So we have to remember that President Obama is a politician. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of God. And you can no more compare President Obama to Martin Luther King Jr. than you can to Moses. Martin Luther King Jr. was more like Moses. And of course, President Obama is not. So I just hope that people will re-examine history and to know that Martin Luther King Jr. was pro-life. His wife, Loretta King, was pro-choice, just like Mrs. Barbara Bush and Mrs. Laura Bush are pro-choice and think a woman should have the right to choose abortion, but their husbands do not. That was the truth of Martin Luther King Jr. He did not even go to the Margaret Sanger Awards program when he was offered that award. His wife went and accepted the award because he was pro-choice.
Sure, and
so
people weren't as informed. And people weren't as informed, obviously, back in the 60s and things. We understand the larger eugenics program now, and you're a great voice exposing that. I've seen you on TV and heard you on radio, and now you've been here. Dr. Elvita C. King, thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to talking to you coming up in late June to do a full interview on your book.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. God bless you. Guys, get her set up right now. Well,
and welcome back. Now, isn't that interesting when we hear the words of the niece of Martin Luther King talking and discussing what she interprets and what she knows of what would be her uncle to be, from policies of abortion to statecraft? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Makes you wonder, makes you think. Some folks will not hear some of these words from me because I'm a white guy, because I'm not a defined Democrat. So therefore, some folks won't listen. But when you're listening to an African American as well, such as the president, when you're listening to the niece of Martin Luther King, that has an impact. Now, let's go over a few news articles. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia accuses the CIA of covering up what would be Malaysia Air Flight 370 when it comes to the disappearance. Now, isn't that interesting? When the former Prime Minister of Malaysia is accusing the CIA of a cover-up here, what is going on? I mentioned in the past, I'm really worried about this situation. I'm worried that that plane may resurface in the future and be used to start a war, possibly, between countries. That plane could be used to be the catalyst of World War III under the circumstances that a nuclear payload is placed on there and flies into some country and is appeared to be from whatever other country that's going to have war with it under the circumstances or whatever. It can be used for a terrorist attack. I have no idea, but I really hope it doesn't happen, and I hope the truth comes out. The meat crisis is here. The price of shrimp is up 61% officially. 7 million pigs have died. Beef is up at an all-time high. The price of food is going up, up, up. GMO producers should be punished as terrorists, according to what would be top Russian government officials. That's interesting. I bet Monsanto wouldn't want to be over in Russia right around now, would they? FBI launches a full investigation into the Bundy Ranch supporters. This is a Ben Swan video coming up here in just a moment, but it's very interesting because when folks come out and support, financially or otherwise, what they believe to be decent, quality American citizens as such, that are just protecting their own rights, which is what I believe the Clive Bundy and his family were doing ultimately, as the law is in their favor. But right now the government, the government was going against the law and deciding to do what they want to do. And that seems to be pretty common these days. As one person said, we are no longer a nation ruled by laws, unquote. And that was, I believe, by Judge Napolitano. So, it's very interesting nonetheless, but to find that we're in a situation where if you dare stand up to the government, if you dare question them, if you dare ask any questions or think that there could be more to it, then you become a conspiracy theorist, or even worse, you're demonized and labeled as a domestic terrorist. That's right. I always was told that it's very American to question your government, question authority, question yourself. We have to question things. That's how we seek the truth. We discover. So in the past, it was very healthy to question, to wonder, to research, to look into and discover your own truth for yourself. But now, you're supposed to go along to get along. But isn't that a commonality within Congress today, within government today? They go along to get along. Well, here's the Ben Swan video, and we'll check you out after this break.
This just in, breaking news, the FBI has launched a full investigation into the Bundy Ranch supporters. This is coming in right now from benswan.com. It's also being reported by Channel 8 News Now in Las Vegas. This is exactly what we knew was going to happen. We predicted that this would take place. And according to writers at benswan.com, the investigation is going to be detailing the death threats, intimidation, and possible weapons violations that occurred at the Bundy Ranch. Metro Police are claiming to have intervened to protect the lives of federal employees from the 400 or so Bundy Ranch supporters and armed militia members. So they believe that the BLM, the federal agencies, believe that they were under threat. But what's being conveniently left out, take a look at this photograph. I know you've seen it a bunch of times, but here's the photograph again. This is BLM agents. These are BLM agents who were taking up positions against the citizenry who were on horseback. Some women and children were there. And yes, there were some militia there. So the BLM felt threatened, but here they are in full military gear. So I don't know it's quite a hypocrisy if you ask me. They said the Metro officers stated that they feared for their lives due to the assemblance of the firepower that was at the Bundy Ranch by the supporters there. And they said there's definitely going to be consequences, definitely that is unacceptable behavior. If we let it go, it will continue into the future. And, well, we knew this was going to take place. We knew that the government was not going to back down. And this is evidence, more evidence to the fact. First, we had a congressman who came out and said that they were going to do an investigation into the militia supporters of the Bundy Ranch, and then of course now this the FBI doing investigations. The first people that they have investigated now, Sheriff Doug Gillespie and the Metro Police. So the FBI is going and talking to the law enforcement to feel out if those law enforcement agents felt that they were threatened by the militia. Meanwhile, the BLM takes their military hardware out for a test run against the civilian supporters there. So this is breaking news right now. The FBI has launched an official investigation, along with the congressman investigating the militia. Of course, Harry Reid saying he's going to set up a federal task force. So this is just the beginning of the consequences that are ahead, because the federal government is not going to back down in this case. They never want to lose, but you know, we the people are the ones who write the checks, who pay the taxes of these folks. So you tell me who the guilty party is. Gary Franchi signing off for the Next News Network.
And welcome back now. So police in Arizona discovered a homeless man living out in the hills. This man had a knife, but by no means was a threat to the police. So if you were to go out into the wilderness and find some mountain man living out there, what's the likelihood that he may have a camping knife on him? Probably almost guaranteed. Most men or women that go fishing enjoy outdoor activities, even a hike in the woods, often carry a pocket knife with them as a tool. Not even for self-defense or any other measure, or to use in a crime. So, what happened when the police discovered this man in Arizona? Well, you're going to see with the video footage shot from the helmet cam from one of the officers himself. And you'll see what happens when they confront this man. They shoot him. They kill him. They murder him. The police use this man for target practice. And what is his crime really? Being poor and homeless. This is a crime against humanity. This is disgusting. Will this happen to you and your family? Will you be used as target practice and considered not valuable to the rest of the world, or mouths not worth feeding anymore? Useless eaters, as Hitler would refer to them? Check out this video footage and brace yourself.
I have the right to kill you right now because you're trying to take your own dog and get stupid. I'm not going to get stupid. You said we were walking out of here and you're beating up assault and everybody's going to get hurt again? Alright, so change up your agreement. I'm going to try to walk with you. Alright. Look, try to harm me. Keep your word. I can keep you safe. Alright? Don't worry about safety. Not a fucking murder. Alright? Try to harm me. Try to harm you. Alright?
Good.
No! You want to Step it up behind you. You moving? His hands still hard. Get your hands out. Drop the knife. Lean back. Right behind you. Put your hands out to your side and drop the knife. Hands out to your side. Bean bag. Bean bag. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Still got the knife. Negative effect. Good one on him. I can get him on him. Yeah, I don't want that knife in his head. Alright, he's good. Somebody step on that right hand real hard. Is that knife in each hand? Knife in each hand. Knife in each hand? Right, slow. I got left. Good. I'm gonna switch you. Alright. Good. You got lethal right there? Yes. I have lethal. That's your right hand. Pop. What's that, man? Further away from it. I didn't see my dead on right. Where'd the first knife go on?
And welcome back. Very riveting, very disgusting. That's not police brutality, that's murder. That's what that is. And if those thugs, so-called police, don't go to prison like anybody else would, then we don't have a true justice system. When it's one set of system for the rest of us that follow the laws, and another set for the government and the so-called enforcement of those laws. If they can get away with those crimes, we're in a bad situation, folks. Senator Chuck Grassley still pushing for answers on Homeland Security's alleged terrorist, quote, hands-off list. China planning Bering Tunnel Strait, what would be a high-speed link. This is amazing because China and Russia are doing their side of the which is to take this infrastructure project, the high-speed maglev train, and go up to the Bering Strait. Then it's up to the United States and North America to finish this off, to do our side of it, our fair share, and to meet them. And what would this do? High-speed maglev trains? Well, you could it would open up what would be the Alaskan and Arctic region to a whole bunch of stuff, from business to tourism to mining to all different kinds of forms of valuable variables, traveling. And instead of just having to fly or ship or whatnot, we would be able to use these high-speed maglev trains going 200 plus 300 miles an hour solid, and possibly we could even make what would be later if we wanted, or with this project we could make the vacuum trains going 1,000 miles an hour, which is really amazing, and that would get goods very quickly from point A to point B. And this was what Abraham Lincoln would do if he were our president today, or if this president was like Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Roosevelt, which is what they try to compare his administration to and what his presidency would be like. That's what they said back in 2008. Does this guy remind you of Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Roosevelt? The jobs are being shipped overseas, not created like Franklin Roosevelt. And slavery, well, unlike what would be our president back then in the 1800s, Lincoln, this president is making everybody a slave. So, strict New Jersey rule on gun permit stands as the Supreme Court refuses to even hear the video. Isn't that interesting? Unconstitutional factors come to the Supreme Court and they just refuse to even take the case. Rand Paul joined by Senator Grassley in a fight to release memo justifying drone strikes on U.S. citizens. Washington, Associated Press article, a unit run by, according to them, President Barack Obama's political staff inside the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, operates illegally as a, quote, rogue law enforcement agency, unquote, that has blocked independent investigations by the EPA's Inspector General for years, a top investigator told Congress. California State Senator Mark DeSaulnier introduces bill to test out taxing motorists for every mile they drive. Now, I discussed this on Facebook. I discussed this on Twitter. I discussed this in former shows, that the idea was out there, and they discussed this in government, not just state-wise, but federal, to potentially tax everybody mile per mile. And what's interesting is, as we begin to see an implosion of the economy, as things are melting down, boiling down, dollars are getting harder to come by, they're not making money off taxes anymore. A lot of these folks, well, they're finding that they have to go to corrupt methods of basically stealing from the American people, such as raising your taxes, hurting you more, taking away from you in order to have their little piece of what they have planned and what they want going. Now, how many times should we have to pay for this bridge, tax-paying dollars, before it's paid for? How many times should they charge us for the same police wages over and over when we've already paid for it? There's this representative here on a state level in Washington State where I reside. He's not my rep, but from Eastern Washington. There's a concert hall out there called the Gorge Amphitheater, very well known. I've seen some big bands out there, myself. From Alice in Chains to other ones, Ozzy. But what they want to do is put a mandatory additional tax of at least $1 per concert ticket out there. Now, I don't mind pitching in my fair share. Honestly, there's a part of me inside that has no problem on a voluntarily basis pitching in that extra $1 to secure my concert experience, to know that there will be paramedic trucks, police, and equipment and things there. God forbid if I don't expect to have a heart attack any soon. I'm 30 years old, turning 31 in a week from now. But it's nice to know, you know, the security and stability is there. I want to know. But didn't they, Washingtonians, already pay for what would be their hospitals to exist? For their police and firefighters and aid workers? Didn't they already pay it? Didn't we pay that already? So on a voluntary basis, are you willing to pitch in an extra $1? I am. Heck, I might pitch in $5 every concert I go over there a couple times a year. It don't bother me. But to be forced to do it under these circumstances, when the government has been irresponsible and derelict of their duties nearly every step along the way, let me tell you folks, we didn't get in this situation overnight. It took a whole bunch of a series of mistakes to put us in the boat we're in, to give us the presidencies of Bush Jr. and Black Bush, as I referred to him as, which is Barack Obama. As I've referred to time and time again, ever since spring of 2009, I stated about this presidency: white Bush, black Bush, we will continue to stay the course toward economic despair, wars overseas, and erosion of constitutional rights in the name of civil liberties and so-called war on terror, etc., etc. I'm standing here 5.5 years later. Was I wrong? 5 years later from me actually saying it. 5.5 years of the Obama presidency. Not according to the niece of Martin Luther King, not according to the logic and facts of what's being shown, not according to look in your refrigerator. How much steak do you have in there? How much of the shrimp that went up 61% do you have in there? There's a grocery store in town. They have lobster days every year. Normally they bring them in by the truckload. Hundreds of lobsters sitting there fresh, ready to go. And even here, where I live in Arlington, Washington, just north of Everett in Seattle, this year you had to order your lobster, pre-order. Why? Because they knew there was no guarantee they were going to sell those lobsters. Because hardly anybody's eating lobster these days. That's why. I'm just a middle-income guy, but I remember being 12, 14, my family had a mom on Social Security, a dad that was a janitor at a grocery store. And guess what? We were able, even living here in Arlington, Washington, to afford a little lobster, steak at night, this and that. Of course, back then, I mean, what was a lobster per pound in '96? You know, $3.99 a pound? Back then you could get, you know, New York strip for $2.99, $3.99 a pound, hamburger for $1 a pound. So food was actually pretty cheap. Hamburger meat, $1 a pound. You could feed the whole block for, you know, 30 bucks back then. And that's called an expensive dinner. You just fed like 20 kids. Now you can't do that. Look in the fridge, look in your wallet, look in your bank account. Look at what's going on around you, folks. It's not a conspiracy theory, and now most of you know. And that's the reason why I'm getting ratings now at nospinnewssource.com, is because many folks, perhaps you or someone you know, has had an opportunity to laugh at me, scoff at me as a conspiracy theorist, as a delusional quack, right-wing nut job, left-wing. I've been called it all. I've been called racist because I was not saying nice things about Obama. I've been called sexist because I put down Hillary Clinton. It has nothing to do with race or sex or anything. I don't care about those things. Those are small, piddly-anny things. They don't mean jack to me. It has to do with policies. It's not about Republican, Democrat, white, black, woman, man. It's about the policies that are good for America. And speaking of that, I decided not to run in this campaign for United States House of Representatives. Now, why am I not running for Congress? I've had a great track record. I'm doing wonderful. I'm on a roll here. I've been proven right in so many things. My head sometimes spins. I can't believe it. I wake up in the morning, check even my local newspaper, which I used to hardly been able to read because it disgusted me. It reminded me of something like Time Magazine, the Herald magazine did, or whatever you call it here, Herald. But now it's amazing because the stuff I was talking about 2 years ago is being discussed now. And it's very interesting, step by step. Reality is beginning to bleed into mainstream. So it's under these circumstances as such, when folks are becoming unstable in their own life, economically, in other ways, as you begin to laugh at someone such as myself to see me be right after so many times, eventually folks have to take a step back and say, how does this guy know this? Well, I know what I know, folks. Long story short, I look at all the facts, I put it together, and I am a political economic forecaster as I take the facts and I say, okay, if you continue to stay the course this way, if you do this action, B, action C, action D, and E, this is where it'll take you. If we go with Glass-Steagall, National Bank, Constitution, good policies, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so on and so forth, and I break it down and I say where we will go. So the fact that we are going still away from what would be the interest of the Constitution, the interest of America, the interest of your family, since our government, including my congressman, Rick Larson, the president and other folks, have chose to take us in the way they have, well, here we are in this predicament today, and this is what I have ultimately came to the conclusion of. As you well know, it's never been about me when it comes to politics. It's always been about you, the people. And one thing I came to the conclusion of is this. As much fun and enjoyment as I would have personally to be in that boxing ring, boxing it out with those candidates, rocking their worlds, I'd have a ball, let me tell you. Debate, Rick Larson wouldn't last minutes with me. He won't last seconds. I will destroy him. I've got logic and facts. I've got right here. So why am I not running for Congress this year? Because the conclusion that I came to, Mr. and Mrs. America, is I can be more effective at helping you and your families doing what I'm doing right here, which is teaching the news and helping you, along with educating the government and trying to show everybody the facts. Allow you to put them together step by step and figure it out in your own timing. Simple as that. Right now, most of you are very confused. You're insecure. You're scared. You quite frankly don't want to think about the future too much because you're worried tomorrow and the next day and next month is going to be worse than it was last month or 2 years ago. A very pessimistic outcome in energy is coming over the people in America, from over the world. Jobs are being destroyed. The economies are being destroyed. Complete lands are being destroyed by places like Monsanto and other genetically modified organism type groups. It's not the interest of anybody or whatnot except for the top 0.01 percentile of the fat cats, the very, very top of the richest of the rich of corporations, which tend not to even pay taxes often. So folks like Warren Buffett that come out and say about how he wants to pay more taxes, well, of course he does. He doesn't really pay any to begin with. So I guess he should pay a few bucks, right? But in the long run, these so-called tax variables, increase of taxes, are not on the rich. They always hit the middle class. They always hit the lower class. When you get pulled over for going 3 miles over the speed limit by your local police officer and you get a $140 ticket and you're a single mom of 4 kids at home, a widow, is it hurting you? As you're already working 3 part-time jobs, barely surviving, lost your home already, what would be the mortgage? Because you couldn't pay the mortgage and now you're living in a low-income apartment, skimming through. We deserve better than this. You deserve better than this. So, people tend to stick with the evil they know versus step away and go with some new solution when they don't really understand the solution and the crisis to begin with. So people will naturally stick with Rick Larson. They're not happy with him, but he's the evil they know. They're not ready yet to walk away from that, but they will shortly. Rick Larson, he'll get re-voted in, but he's coming down to the last of his minutes in time. We shall see. So, at this point in the road, I want to show you what would be the Benghazi CIA congressional hearing testifying in front of Congress, and this begins to blow the lid off of what will be hearings beginning in June, including with Secretary of State John Kerry himself being driven to testify before congressional hearings. We will catch you back after this break. Thank you.
We're going to get back to the hearings now. The House Select Committee on Intelligence quizzing Mike Morrell, the former acting director of the CIA.
Serious intel product that is actually, you brought it up on the 13th.
So I don't remember saying that there was, briefing the deputies that there was a protest at the deputies meeting on the 13th, but I would not be surprised at all that I did so.
The way I understand it,
why do I say?
Maybe this will spur your recollection, because I know it was a long time ago, that you got an update on the call from the chief of station and the charge. You got an update. Mr. McDonough led the call. You got a quick update, and then Mr. McDonough turned to you, and you talked about this new stream of this new product.
Correct.
Is that right?
So again, I don't remember, but as I said, I would not be surprised if I briefed the deputies on the 13th that the attack had evolved from a protest. Why wouldn't I be surprised? Because that very morning, we published a piece that said that. And my job as deputy director was to represent the views of the CIA at the deputies meeting. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, sir.
Right. So did the Deputy National Security Advisor, Dennis McDonough, who's now the White House Chief of Staff, did he know about that product before you mentioned it?
Which product are we talking about? On the 13th?
Yes, the 13th.
He would have read that product that morning.
Had you conspired beforehand?
No.
Okay.
Conspired to do what?
To talk about this, that the protests had led to the attack.
No.
Okay, so you had not talked to Dennis McDonough. He was not prompting you to announce that this.
This was the CIA's considered judgment at the time. A written product produced, disseminated.
I thought it was all the IC community had signed off on the product. Okay. So I think one of the problems here, Mr. Morrell, is the charge, the station chief, the base chief, the diplomatic security officials, all the DOD officials, and all the CIA station personnel that were in Benghazi have all reported by this time that the assault began as a pre-planned attack, not a protest. So, in other words, the product that you were using on the 13th was contradicted by every single person that was on the ground in Libya.
Didn't know it at the time, sir. Didn't know it until Saturday morning when the chief of station sent his email.
But what were you guys talking about then on the deputies committee meeting that occurred on the 12th and the 13th?
So on the 12th, there was no discussion of a protest. There was no discussion of a protest on the 12th. On the 13th, any discussion of the protest would have been based on the the classified product that was produced that morning.
But in all the discussions, were you ever involved in any discussions with Tripoli?
Yes, they were, as I said.
On the 12th and the 13th?
They were on the screen on the 12th, and I believe they were on the screen on the 13th.
And wouldn't they have said that this wasn't a...
They did not say this was not a protest. I do not remember
this
that.
This committee, the chairman actually went out on, as he said in his opening statement, the chairman, we had at this committee significant intelligence product, where the chairman of our committee was able to go out and say this was an attack. On the 12th, I believe. And you're telling me you're on calls with Tripoli, deputies, with the deputies committee, sometimes twice a day, and you don't know until the 14th or 15th that everybody on the ground believes this was a pre-planned attack.
Sir, we believe from the get-go that this was an attack. We believe from the get-go that this was a terrorist attack. The analysts did not believe then or now that there was significant pre-planning.
I understand that, Mr. Morell, but the problem is that you've got all of these conflicting stories, right? The stories that you talked to the senators, and it was what Mr. King brought up, that they were changed by the FBI, not the White House. Report later you took responsibility for that. Then there's other contradictions about whether or not in the talking points, whether the White House was involved or not. All of this has proved to be false, but I read your testimony and you have an excuse for everything. For everything. For all of that you have an excuse for, which is fine. But when the chairman asks you about when you sat next to Jim Clapper in November 2012, you don't have an excuse, you only have an apology.
I have an explanation of why I did not say anything in response to the question who took Al-Qaeda out of the talking points, because I did not know at the time who did that.
But I think
my apology...
The chairman was asking, Mr. Morell.
My apology...
You sat in front of our committee in November of 2012, and you had a chance to stop. You wouldn't have had to be here today had you just said what you knew at the time.
Oh, I don't believe that at all, sir. I'd be here anyway. Because the only thing I would have been able to say at the time was, Mr. Chairman, I do not know who removed Al-Qaeda from the talking points, but what I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, is that I myself played a role in editing those talking points. That was the only thing I could have said at the time.
I know my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for letting me go over. Yield back.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Morell, on September 11th, we know that there's a fair amount of activity that was going on at the compound that day in Benghazi. Chris Stevens was active that day. The Turkish ambassador had come to visit Ambassador Stevens at the compound that day. We know from eyewitness testimony on the ground, contemporaneous in time, from the RSO who was there, that the Turkish ambassador, when he was there and all through the day, there were no sightings, no indication in any way of any gathering of any protesters around the compound around Benghazi. There was closed circuit television, there was the February 17th Brigade, there were people there offering security. No one at any time prior to the attack gave any indication that there was a protest going on at the compound. The RSO himself said there was nothing going on at the compound. The chief of station in Tripoli had no indication of any protests going on. The political officers had no indication of anything going on. The GRS officers coming from the annex over, no one, anyone involved in this situation, no one had any indication of a protest going on. And yet, the Obama administration allowed its spokesman for the first time in the first public disclosure, 5 times on the Sunday morning shows, made a false narrative that a YouTube video was the reason that explained that there were protesters that we now know are apparitions, never existed, were there. This is a false narrative. That's why this is not a small issue. This is a big issue, Mr. Morell. because we have emails in front of us, cables in front of us that don't lie. That's not a conspiracy. And the emails and the cables are very clear about what we knew and when we knew it. We know that while the attack was going on, that there was already from the State Department at 4:05 p.m. an alert that was put out from the State Department that the compound was under attack. The second was at 6:08 p.m. that Ansar al-Sharia, an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group operating in Libya, claimed credit for the attack. We also know that a cable that was sent on September 12th by CIA station chief in Libya reported eyewitnesses confirmed the participation of Islamic militants and made clear that U.S. facilities in Benghazi had come under attack. Even your first draft from the CIA prepared, distributed internally showed, this was 11:15 a.m., we have date stamps on it, that the CIA and the U.S. government knew that Islamic extremists with ties to al-Qaeda participated in the attack. All of that we knew. What changed is when the talking points, prepared again by your office, when those talking points intersected with the White House. And those organizations within the White House included senior State Department officials, senior national security officials, all of those that you talked to us about, Robert Cordillo, Alan, Matt, Jake, Mark, Lisa, Ben, all of these, the only change that happened were senior White House officials. And we know from the emails, particularly from Victoria Nuland, that has been referenced by my colleagues, from the date stamp time, again, at 9:24 p.m., Ms. Nuland wrote that the problem remains. Her superiors were unhappy. The changes that were made did not resolve all my issues or those of my building leadership. We also know Ben Rhodes from the National Security Foreign Policy further advised the group, the issues will be resolved in a meeting of top administration officials the following morning at the White House. At the White House, Saturday, before Miss Rice went on the Sunday morning shows. They were resolved all right. They were resolved in the favor of the White House. And what's really odd here is that the false narrative that was given on Sunday morning, on the Sunday morning shows, somehow strangely added up with the view of the White House 6 weeks before the presidential election that al-Qaeda was nearly defeated and the global war on terror was over. Everyone on this committee knows that wasn't true, that al-Qaeda wasn't defeated. Everyone on this committee, both sides of the aisle, knows that the global war on terror was not over. That was the narrative of the White House in the run-up to the presidential election. How weird that that ultimately was reflected in the talking points against all knowledge from people on the ground and knowledge this committee had. That's why we're upset, because the American people, from my perspective, were intentionally misled by this administration as to what happened in Benghazi.
Chairman, can I respond? I'd make 2 points, ma'am. Number one, the narrative that the attack evolved spontaneously from a protest was a narrative that intelligence community analysts believed. Not just CIA analysts, intelligence community analysts. That turned out to be incorrect, but that is what they believed at the time. So there is no politics there whatsoever. That's point number one. Point number two is, let me actually give you the facts of what the State Department changed in those talking points and what the White House changed. The White House changed 3 things. The first thing the White House changed was to add Cairo in front of the word embassy for the sake of clarity. The second thing the White House changed was to rearrange a couple of sentences, purely stylistic. The third thing the White House changed was to change the word consulate to diplomatic post for accuracy. Those were the only changes the White House made. The changes the State Department made, 2, just 2. They too wanted to change the word consulate to diplomatic post for exactly the same reason. The second change the State Department made was to remove the entire bullet on Ansar al-Sharia, because State Department said it was premature to single out a specific group, and the CIA agreed because the only unclassified evidence we had at the time was Ansar al-Sharia's public statement, which they then retracted. So the State Department and the White House made 5 changes only, all of them, in my view, fairly insignificant.
Mr. Morrell, they didn't have to change because you made the changes for them.
The changes...
That's the point. That's why you're in front of this committee today. You made significant substantive changes for the White House. Whether it was on behalf, we don't know. But we know you are the one who made those changes.
Ma'am, if you look at the record, what you will see is the changes I made were fully consistent with what our analysts believed at the time. Period.
The analysts that were part of the bureaucracy, not the individuals who are on the ground, who had eyewitness testimony and who as early as September 12th had sent you a cable that it was not a protest, that it was in fact an attack. Those were intentionally ignored.
So ma'am, do you believe that we should have accepted the chief of station's view without question that it was a protest?
I believe that the totality of the information was obfuscated and that there was an intentional misleading of the public.
Because if you believe that we should have accepted his explanation of what happened, then you also need to accept his view that it could have been the video that motivated the individuals to attack the diplomatic facility that night.
We spoke with him yesterday behind closed doors. He was adamant from the very beginning that this was not a spontaneous protest. We heard from him directly yesterday that at no time did he believe it was based upon the video. It isn't just him. It's the RSO, it's the chief of base, it's those who came from the annex, it is the political officers. All of them agreed. You take that versus some press reports and one signal versus the weight and balance aren't even equal. It isn't even equal. The evidence overwhelmingly pointed to an attack that was Al-Qaeda or jihadist related.
It wasn't just one piece of SIGINT, ma'am. There was also reporting from the station.
More than one SIGINT?
There was
more than one SIGINT?
There was also...
That wasn't our understanding.
There was also reporting from the CIA station that there was a protest, as well as from the Department of Defense. There was a human piece, there was SIGINT, and there was human from the Department of Defense. There was multiple intelligence pieces.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Morrell, for being here. Thank you for your service to our nation, and I also thank all of those who... Fireworks on Capitol Hill in front of the House Select Committee on Intelligence as Mike Morrell, who was he was the deputy director and acting director of the CIA at the time of the Benghazi attacks in September of 2012, as he testifies in front of that committee. You heard Representative Michelle Bachmann, Republican from Minnesota, giving a pretty good summation of what Republicans believe, many believe, is the problem with what happened that night. The talking points were adjusted to reflect the administration's claim, and in fact the Obama campaign claim, that Al-Qaeda was on the run. If you'd like to continue to watch the hearings, we have them streaming for you live on foxnews.com in just a moment.
And welcome back to the show. Now, some folks, such as Senator Dianne Feinstein, ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate in general of California, and other people, many representatives, including one of the congressmen here in Washington State, have clearly stated on the record that they think this is a witch hunt, they think this is bogus, they think doing any more looking into this Benghazi variable is a waste of time, and they say that the Republicans are using this to play politics and to help them out and this and that. Well, I don't doubt that people in what would be the government are using this or that to make themselves look good. That's what a lot of people do on all sides. You think the Democrats don't do that? What do you think Obama was doing when he said, change you can believe in, this and that? He was playing upon your fears. He was playing upon what you wanted to hear. He was telling you how he's so much different. And was he any different than Bush? He's worse than Bush. Our nation's more divided than it ever has and hopefully ever will be. So, the only other time that I know that our nation was as divided as this was back in the days of Abraham Lincoln when we had the secession of the South. So let's go through some fast articles. Senator Graham charges the FBI wrongly classifying the Sarasota 9/11 files. Retired U.S. Senator Bob Graham, Democrat of Florida, who chaired the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, told the Herald Tribune that he was deeply skeptical about the government claims of legitimacy secrecy. Quote, "One of my concerns about this whole process is how opaque it is. My experience has been that often classification has more to do with covering up mistakes and avoiding embarrassment than it has to do with any reasonable definition of national security." And he goes on to state more in this article. Machinist unions, President Buffenbarger calls for Congress to reinstate Glass-Steagall. He says build a national TVA, which has to do with what would be the Tennessee Valley Authority back under what would be Franklin Roosevelt. And because of what would be the factor of, and I discussed this last month as well, our congressman here in Washington State, what would be my congressman here, Rick Larson, which will be my opponent in due time, that ultimately he lost what would be the union support this year for the first time ever because of the fact of his voting record, and he was not there in the best of interest. Glass-Steagall is here to stay, and without Glass-Steagall and national banking and constitutional freedom and principles, we have no job or economy. And the rest of the world, they want this too. Even though we've shipped our jobs over there, if we do what's right here, we'll have so much money to spend around the world in tourism and buying other goods too. Guess what? Everybody, it's a win-win-win. We don't have to have war because we're going poor. We don't have to steal from each other. This is something I was mentioning earlier. As I see a lot of government, just like I see families and people on the streets, they're turning on each other. Times get hard and they're turning on one another. I got people downtown at Arlington City Hall. I got people at the county level, people on the state level, and other folks that come and whisper little secrets and things to me. But they do it to get me to look down at the other guy and to help them somehow, or to make them look good with me somehow. That's not right. That's playing politics once again. They don't care about really what's the right thing to do. They just want to mention the one wrong thing that they can take the other guy down about. So there was a man licensed by the state of South Carolina to carry a weapon and defend himself. He has a permit. He was in what would be a restaurant. The restaurant was being robbed. That's right, by an African-American teenager that was 19 years old of age. So the 19-year-old comes into the place, has a couple of friends, has a weapon, and is robbing the place. What does one of the people that's sitting there do? Well, everybody else plays victim to be robbed. One individual decides to pull out the gun and to let him have it. And guess what's going on now? Family of the thug that got shot out of self-defense is trying to say that they want to sue the individual that shot and killed their robber thug family member. You know what I have to say? That guy can go straight to hell with all I care at the tip of a bullet, and I don't care less. 19 years old is plenty old enough to know better. How many children were in that place? How many women were in there? How many people are going to be traumatized and have anxiety and have to take pills for a head problem? How many people are going to be scared to go out to a restaurant next time for fear they're going to be robbed? That's not justice. That is not justice. We have people who are traumatized. If anybody's going to sue anybody, these people should be suing them. But of course, it's not the family that is rightfully wrong for what their family member did. It's the individual which is shot and dead, and shows you what happens. You play with fire, you get burned. You try to rob me, I'll shoot you too. Or whoever. That's justice. That's what we need. We need some Clint Eastwood style justice on our street. Go ahead and make my day. That is what we need. If the cops know this, if the thugs know this, you'll see respect. You'll see people decide not to do as much robbing and stealing. You'll see police that all of a sudden have respect for your rights. Why? Because they know you're packing heat. God bless this man's soul when it comes to the individual that rightfully self-defended himself. I got video footage and whatnot. legally speaking, showing that this man was legally doing what the South Carolina laws state for him to do and was within the means of what would be his firearm training. And I'm going to show you that video right now. And you be the judge.
Investigators say this surveillance video shows Williams and his accomplice Jawan Craig coming to the restaurant, with Williams pointing a gun and demanding money. The man you see at the counter is Justin Harrison.
They're yelling, everybody get down, get down. And I'm just thinking, I'm not getting on the floor, I'm not going to be a victim.
Harrison, a CWP holder, was armed and says while the men terrorized the other customers and staff, he was deciding when to act.
This is the only time if I'm going to fight, it would have been that time, that moment. He is approaching me. I saw that as him engaging me.
The video shows Williams, gun by his side, walk towards Harrison, who stands up and fires several shots. Williams died at the scene. The video then shows Harrison tried to hold Craig at gunpoint, but Craig tries grabbing Harrison's gun and eventually escapes. Deputies later caught up with Craig, and he has since been convicted in the robbery, thanks in part to this video. David Blanton, a former Spartanburg County deputy, was Harrison's CWP instructor, and after reviewing the video, he says Harrison followed his training and was justified in firing.
Not only was he defending his own life, which the law says he can do by the right of self-defense, there were other people in the restaurant.
According to Blanton, getting a CWP involves filling out an application, an 8-hour class taught by an instructor, a written exam, and finally, a live fire qualification.
It still kind of puzzles us as to why he would do something so crazy.
Tamika McSwain is Williams' cousin and says the training isn't enough, and because of that, her cousin died. She says the surveillance video shows that Harrison was not in immediate danger when he fired the fatal shots.
I understand you felt threatened because of the situation, but you said that the gun was pointed at you, so you fired. In fact, he was walking out.
McSwain admits that her cousin made a terrible decision the night he died. She says it was out of character for the Dorman High senior who had never been in trouble before.
He was always sharp, funny, goofy, loved to dance all the time, really respectable, just a fun boy.
McSwain says her family was disappointed that Harrison wasn't charged and says her family is still considering pursuing other legal action against him. And she adds that this case shows that more training is needed before issuing a CWP. But Harrison says the training is enough, and this video shows that he did what he had to.
They got the gun. He picked it up. He could have said no. He hung out with the wrong crowd.
In Spartanburg County, Adrian Acosta, Fox Carolina News Tonight.
Welcome back. Now, according to the law, that man legally did what he could do, which is defend himself. God bless America. Now, let's talk about global warming. Climate McCarthyism, the scandal grows, according to a Breitbart.com article. There's been a lot of scandals lately, hasn't there, in the news? It goes on, it says in here that the paper which Professor Benghazi wrote with 4 co-authors suggests that climate probably is less sensitive to greenhouse gases than is admitted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that more research needs to be done to, quote, reduce the underlying uncertainty, unquote. However, when submitted for publication in the leading journal for environmental research letters, the paper failed the peer review process and was rejected. One of the peer reviewers reportedly wrote, quote, it is harmful as it opens the door for oversimplified claims of, quote, errors, and worse, from the climate skeptics, media side. So what's happening is political views, opinion, one side of the story is being told with climate change. Now, I've been that guy at the beginning, showing what would be science, showing fact, and I said global warming was a sham. Al Gore said in his environmentalist video going back, I believe it was 2006, when he made that environmental movie, the whatever truth, I can't recall what it is, the something truth of Al Gore, the video he made. The Inconvenient Truth, I believe it was, he stated in 2014 cities like LA, Seattle would be underwater. Well, I was just in Seattle a couple days ago enjoying a concert. 3 days ago. And 4 days ago. I was enjoying what would be 3D IMAX at the Seattle Center, Pacific Science Center there. Watching the new movie in 3D, what would be Godzilla. I went and saw the Spy exhibit, which was fun. It was just a bunch of stuff basically from the OSS and stuff dating back from the 40s through the 60s range. But still interesting nonetheless, an exhibit. I'd sure love to see the toys and stuff our spies and folks have to play with now. I'd love to know that stuff, that'd be interesting. Gadgets and whatnot. But the point of the matter is, which is not what I did over the weekend, the point of the matter is Seattle is not underwater. And if we continue to listen to these idiots that have no science, that have their own agendas, that make money off of selling you carbon credits, that's right, Al Gore. He's the head of a company that's called Blood and Gore Inc. Incorporated, that's right. Look into that one, Blood and Gore. Police now armed against returning veterans in what will be a PrisonPlanet.com article owned by good old Alex Jones. And this article is by post of Paul Joseph Watson from May 16th. In a chilling story entitled Armed for War, Pentagon Surplus Gives Local Police an Edge, we learn how a mine-resistant vehicle, MRAP, which was once used during the occupation of Afghanistan, is being used to be patrolling the streets of now central Indiana. That's right. So what's happening is this. I made a statement years ago, back when it was Bush in office. Back in 2004, I stated, and this was before I was like a political figure, just when I was some guy that just talked politics with folks, you know, around a table or this or that, that ultimately I stated that if we allowed these wars to take place, I stated this as a 20-year-old man at the time, that if we didn't care about the people of Afghanistan and Iraq and these other nations, the citizenry, I don't mean we're supposed to care for the bad guys, I mean care for the decent, honest people. If we didn't care for them, when they were being wrongfully mistreated, some of these folks were raped, poisoned, experimented on, by our troops and others, the British and other folks. If we didn't care for these other folks and these other nations, these third world countries, if we didn't care for them, I stated eventually this would come back onto us and our streets, and who's going to care about the American people? Well, now these MRAP vehicles are hitting the streets of central Indiana along with other city municipalities throughout what will be the United States. So I didn't even mean it literally. Normally, you know, I'm very literal. I sometimes use figure of speech and metaphors and use a little sarcasm and have a little parody or a little humor and whatnot there. But in general, I'm very direct, very outforward, and I get to the point and I stay focused on it for a reason. You know, a little satire once in a while, but in general, 95% is direct. And I didn't even mean that statement exactly directly as such, but interestingly enough, those exact vehicles and the exact treatment step by step is coming to America. Little would I know before I got into forecasting or even as deep into the political economic situation did a metaphor I say would be coming into reality. It's kind of scary. Well, Lyndon Larouche was on from LarouchePAC.com was on Jesse Ventura's Off the Grid show recently, in which he discussed the role of the British Empire and factors, and we get to see and hear from him, himself, the man that was friends with and was commanded under the leadership of Eisenhower himself, a man that was brought in by former members of the OSS to educate them into help, which later became the CIA. This is the man that used to get flown into Langley every Friday by a helicopter, Langley, Virginia, to the CIA headquarters to give the CIA weekly briefings. This man is Mr. Lyndon Larouche, and he will educate you and tell you a little bit about the political war situation that we're facing on a World War III note, and how what would be the Queen of England has something to do with that, and everything to do with that. We'll catch you back.
Today, this political firebrand has called George W. Bush a Nazi, insisted we impeach Barack Obama. He joins me off the grid to discuss the sad state of American affairs. A presidential candidate in each election from 1976 to 2004, he ran once for his own U.S. Labor Party and 7 times for the Democratic Party nomination. He is a controversial, political, dissident, activist, and founder of the LaRouche movement, a political and cultural faction that promotes LaRouche and his ideas. He's published numerous works on economic, scientific, and political topics, as well as on history, philosophy, and psychoanalysis. Mr. Lyndon Larouche joins me today on Off the Grid. And Lyndon, the first question that I got to ask you, now let me back up a little. In the peak of my wrestling career back in the 80s and early 90s, I was flying on jet planes all over America from one side to the next. I'd fly sometimes 20, 25 times a month. And I'd go to all these airports back in the 80s throughout America, and I would see people with hats on with Lyndon Larouche. Lyndon, who the hell are you?
I'm someone who actually had a career as a management consultant back in the 1940s after coming out of military service in World War II. I'm 90 odd years of age. I'm about 92 now.
Well, good for you.
Well, I intend to do more if I don't get killed by our enemies. And I do mean our enemies from various parts of the world. What my function is, I'm actually an economist. I'm a leading economist in the United States in forecasting. And that started back in the 1940s. And I've been an accurate forecaster because I forecast the future. And not as by some ball, but by a scientific approach. And so I've been also, for example, I've ran with President Reagan and his crew, of which I was a co-conspirator in putting up the SDI. The SDI was my design, but I was backed up by the organization, the intelligence organization, which had been assembled by Reagan for his intelligence service. And I was used for a project which I had designed, which was the so-called Strategic Defense Initiative. That was not a plan for a war. It was a plan for a new agreement, an international agreement of something that had been cooked up by an earlier president, Franklin Roosevelt, before he died. Roosevelt had sought to try to make an arrangement, despite the British Empire, an arrangement between he and Stalin, because Stalin caved in. Stalin said, oh, okay, I'm with you fully. Unfortunately, when he died, and when other things came in, Stalin became enraged. And Stalin launched a war into Northern Korea with his tanks as a result of his rage. Then Stalin was, at a later point, assassinated. And a new group took over. And it was a British group that controlled a lot of the Soviet people. A lot of the Soviet system was controlled by the British Empire. There were some people who were not controlled by the British Empire, but many were. Bertrand Russell was the key figure in this whole operation. Russell was actually the most evil man of the 20th century in his whole entire behavior. And today we've got a very similar situation where the British Empire crowd, and it is an empire, is still doing the same thing. President Reagan was actually blocked up by the same crew, the Bush family, which starts with Prescott Bush, who was the guy who pushed Hitler into power in the first place. So Bush and then the Bush family, for example, take the state of Texas, which I think you're familiar with. The state of Texas was taken over from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. How was it done? By the Bush family. Prescott Bush was the author of the operation. But it was his son, who was sort of a lame-brained character. Both of the sons, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush Jr., were both lame brains. I think Jr. was more lame-brained than his father. But so this was simply an operation where the state of Texas was taken over. Other things were done, which just corrupted our nation tremendously. Now we've come to the point where we're on the verge of a thermonuclear war actually as a threat. We have our most responsible people in government, in institutions like the Joint Chiefs and other universal institutions, are against this thing. They know this is a fake. There's no reason for a war. Besides, you cannot have a thermonuclear war on this planet, because a thermonuclear war involving the planetary system would be an extermination warfare.
Lyndon, let me interject something. You're obviously very well spoken. You obviously have a world of knowledge that you can bring forward. Why, when I didn't know you, why did the mainstream media portray you as some kind of nut, which I think they have, haven't they?
They tried.
Because I remember that back in the 80s and 90s. Is it again the case that you're common sense and you're the guy that really knows, so they marginalize you on purpose?
I can be called common sense in my actual relationship with ordinary people. That's not a problem for me. The only problem is that we have a bunch of scared people. And that happened after FDR died. When FDR died, we had a completely new government. We then had, Kennedy. President Kennedy was a great leader. He was the protege of Eleanor Roosevelt, actually. But he was also a great leader. They assassinated him. Then his brother, John, was assassinated.
Well,
his brother Robert was assassinated.
So, Lyndon, let's stop there for a moment. When you say they assassinated him, can I get you on the record unequivocally that you don't believe Lee Harvey Oswald did it?
Of course not.
Only a sucker would ever believe that story.
Well, Lyndon, there's a lot of suckers out there that believe that story, including our mainstream media, which I understand their position. They bought it from the start. It's the crime of the century, and they're never going to admit they had the crime of the century wrong, so they will never admit it.
Not willingly.
If I got him under his possession as an authority, an official, I would get the evidence out because I know how we can do it. A lot of people know how we can do it. But it's an international problem which happened in the post-war period. We had the assassination of the two Kennedy brothers. One was on the night before he was about to be designated as a Democratic candidate for president. And John was a genius. And this was an operation run from British circles, essentially.
So, Lyndon, what you're telling me, the assassination of the Kennedys originated in British circles?
What happened is when Franklin Roosevelt died, we were already in trouble before he died. We had a Republican election, which is a very bad election. And the minute that Franklin Roosevelt actually died, Truman, who was a Wall Street type, completely Wall Street owned, was taken in as a stooge. Now, Truman was not really the president. Truman was a product of Wall Street, completely Wall Street owned. And that's been our problem ever since. The assassinations of our presidents, very simple. Wall Street. It goes back, for example, to Alexander Hamilton, who was the first important president, or no, he wasn't a president, but he was actually in the presidency, who designed our economic system, on which we survived. Then you had a bunch of other presidents who were opportunists. It doesn't mean they were evil in intention. It means they were opportunists. They were out to do the best deal they could for themselves. Then you had Monroe. Now, Monroe was a military genius. He was not an economic genius. But he became educated by John Quincy Adams, who was a genius. And therefore you had the second term of Monroe and the first term of John Quincy Adams. This was a period of genius. We didn't have another genius who survived, who wasn't assassinated, until Benjamin Franklin, and he was assassinated. John Quincy Adams would have been assassinated, but he wasn't. But he lived on for a period until he became tied up with Abraham Lincoln. And the Lincoln administration was actually an extension, a revival of the John Quincy Adams leadership. Then we had, at the end of the century, we had Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. We had other presidents who were assassinated. And we had a bunch of bums much of the time. And generally it was international interests trying to take over the United States from abroad.
Is that who is the mind behind all these assassinations? Does it come from international?
Oh, absolutely. It comes chiefly from the British Empire. And the British Empire is an empire. It is not a kingdom. And the British people, for example, are not the evil force. The British Empire is.
And what you're telling me now, Lyndon, is even today, the British Empire is dangerous.
You had two presidents recently. One was a dummy, George W. Bush Jr. He had no brains. But that was the way we liked it. The vice president ran the presidency for 2 terms. Now you have an Obama. Obama's nothing but a stooge. He's controlled from abroad entirely.
Who exactly in Britain controls Obama?
The British Emperor. The British Empress. And Elizabeth II. Really, she's called the first, but she's actually the second.
So she actually still runs the whole deal?
Right. Take a policy. Look at the policy that you have right on record. Our policy is the green policy.
Why is Lyndon Larouche calling for Obama's impeachment? Find out when we return on Off the Grid.
So here we go, folks. We are becoming a police state. A nation that used to be ruled with good intentions and by laws, the Constitution, is not such a good nation. When we look at our neighbors, hell, when many of us look in the mirror at ourselves, what do you see these days? We became very demoralized. Now most of you know Obama is a worthless president, and most of you don't even care enough to do anything about it. You just stay a slave to the grind, caught in the system, and do very little or nothing to make the world a better place. Many of you will be the living example, unfortunately, as things fall apart. But it is what it is. That doesn't mean that every one of you that loses your job or has financial hardships deserves what you're receiving by any means. And that's not what I'm saying. But we are at a point in the road, folks, when we do have to change. We have to care. We have to care about the neighbor and his job. Why? Because it may be your job that's going to be cut next. So, we have to go back to the old agape principle, the love thy neighbor principle, which is instilled within the intention of our framers of our Constitution. The love thy neighbor concept, which is found within the scriptures of the Holy Bible. Why is this important, to love thy neighbor, to care about the neighbor so much? Because caring for your neighbor is the only guarantee you will have of security and having someone to care for you. So it's the right thing to do. So if you really care about yourself, you'll care about everybody around you first, so that way you know you're going to be looked after. Kind of contradicting, isn't it? Give it away and get more? Doesn't make any sense, does it? But sometimes it's just how life works. Life's kind of funny like that at times. So as we're closing off with our few articles here, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter Chris Hedges, along with journalist Naomi Wolf, Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, activists Chandran Bolin and others are suing the government to join the NDAA's allowance of what would be of the indefinite detention of Americans, the NDAA. Something that has not changed over the last 2 years, 2012, 2013, or the 2014. The trial judge in the case asked the government attorneys 5 times whether journalists like Hedges could be indefinitely detained simply for interviewing and then writing about the bad guys. Isn't that sad when we have to ask if a news reporter could be put in prison over asking about something? I mean, it makes you wonder who's really guilty and whatnot and who's telling the truth. Who has something to hide? Why does the government want to put people in indefinite detention camps that think differently? How come everybody that says something bad about this president is automatically a racist? How come someone who says that they don't like Hillary Clinton gets labeled as a sexist and a woman hater? That's not what we're supposed to be. And I want to say right now, you're going to see a lot more sexism, racism, and other disgusting forms of hatred coming into media, news, your movies, telephone, what do you call it, sitcoms and whatnot, television shows, video games and what have you. NFL games, you're going to see different flavors of this in different ways to help get you, the American people, to bend over and give in. They want you to think that anything you say that's politically incorrect is not worth hearing and you don't have a right to say it, or you might be a bigot, sexist, racist bastard if you do. It's American to have an opinion. I don't expect you to think like me. I don't expect you to believe what I tell you. But I do expect you to do one thing. Look into my claims and these individuals and the facts that I have here, and you will discover I'm not telling you any lies. Simple as that. I'm telling a story you may not be ready for yet, but someday you will, and you'll come back to these archives and remember what I said. Many of you already are, because I've been wrong too many times now to be a fool. 3D flying printer could seal off nuclear waste sites. That's right. They're coming out with and working on a 3D printer, a drone that could go in and take care of these things and not be subjected, therefore subjecting humans to this radiation. I think that's great. When we use a drone, unmanned aircraft for that, wonderful. That's great. I love technology. A University of California, Santa Barbara student alleges that her black studies professor warned, quote, stated, quote, Ted Cruz supporting teabaggers to get the hell out of his classroom before he sent them home to their mother in a body bag. This is an alleged allegation here, alleged, but if that's true, is that racism right there by a black man? Is that wrong of a black man to say that? Anybody here who likes Ted Cruz, get the hell out of here, I'll send you home in a body bag? That is pretty hardcore. That's extremely hardcore, if that is true. This was reportedly on the first day of class last fall. The course was offered by Professor Otis Madison and it was titled The Obama Phenomenon. Yeah, it is a phenomenon. There are still some idiots out there that are caught and loyal to Obama. I'm loyal to Obama, is what Cancer Pat said. And now she has terminal cancer. She came down with less than 2 months later and had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. Seen all kinds of karma hitting her left and right. Well, when you're loyal to the devil, you don't just get the change and the blessings, if you will, the benefits of being there, being evil, you also take the curse, people. And I'm not trying to give a sermon or preach at you. I like to stay scientific in facts and try to keep out my bias and opinions. But I just find it very interesting that when a certain woman here in town named Pat found out and discovered after she was telling lies about me and this and that to make me look bad, because she doesn't like my politics, she discovered I was not in love with Obama. Apparently she thought I was. Anyway, and so it came very personal. Well, it's just interesting how things kind of work out. So we're at the point of finishing up the show. I just want to say I thank you very much for joining us once again in the June monthly report here, 2014, high definition video action for nospinnewssource.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and put up links and articles, many of them which never come onto the show. I do this daily. So check me out, Kari Ilonummi, on Twitter and Facebook. For those of you that are discouraged and saddened by the fact I'm not running for Congress this year, don't be sad. There's a time and place for everything. And right now I can be more effective helping you and the rest of America through this show and what I'm doing with my campaigning, not on the aspect of a campaign for congressional wise, but on the aspect of visiting and going to these campaigns, interjecting the right ideas and the truth on the right and left side, sitting down with these people. And I'm going to go to the Republican, Democratic, and all of what would be these factors that I can go to and talk to as many of the candidates and the people throughout Washington State as I can and organize these people to the right ideas, Glass-Steagall, the Constitution, and what is to come. So step by step, we can see decent people in government in your city, in your county, and throughout the state of Washington. It's never been about me. It's always been about you, the people. And this sacrifice that I'm making this year of stepping back and not running is proof of that. That's the ultimate sacrifice. It's not about me. It's about you. So, God bless each and every one of you. I will see you next month for July edition. I can't wait. Take care of yourself. Enjoy life. Learn to appreciate what you have, folks, because this economy is getting ready to go down the baskets a lot worse. And if Hillary Clinton becomes your next president, we're all had. God bless you. See you next month. Take care now.